Hey friends, how's it going? It is Michael Parker and welcome back to Michael Parker Media. Today we're going to talk about a story of exploration and adventure in the 21st century. And in this particular story, we're going to hear about a lost city that is deep in a quite inhospitable jungle. And weirdly enough, you would think, well, that has to be an adventure film or that must have happened a few hundred years ago. No, it happened here in the 21st century. And my guest today was there from the beginning of it till its end. And he is Tom Weinberg. He is the author of this book, Chasing the Lost City, Chronicles of Discovery in Honduras. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, nice to be here.
I'm glad that you are here.
As the official chronicler, it's an honor.
Well, your story is amazing. I'm an archaeology buff and nerd, and I like history, and I'm always wanting to learn more about human origins and where we came from. And in this particular story, let's go back to 1994. Your good friend, Steve Elkins, comes to you, and he tells you about this place. It's called Ciudad Blanca, or Lost City of the Monkey God, White City. What is it, and where is it that you think?
Well, in fact, where we were and what we explored and what we found stuff at was in Honduras, in the Mesquite jungle, which kind of borders Honduras and Nicaragua. And it was kind of deep into the jungle. The closest town, real city, was called Catacamas, which is probably the number 4 or 5 city in the hellhole that is called Honduras. What was the second part? That's where, right?
Well, basically what I wanted to do is I wanted you to tell the audience we're going to get into what this thing was, but your understanding of it in 1994, when Steve tells you about this, it's a lost city somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Well, Steve Elkins, I had known for many years before 1994, I think early in the 70s. And he was a filmmaker and a camera guy in LA for forever after he left Chicago. And he was on a gig a year or two before 1994 that was the German magazine Spiegel, I believe,
yes,
TV. And they were looking for, I don't know what, they had an idea. Maybe it was the Lost City of the Monkey Gods or something. But they certainly didn't find anything, and they weren't prepared as well to do it. And they did find some stuff and were able to make a little movie, little bits and pieces, and there's some good still pictures. And Steve learned a lot and hooked up with some people down there in 93 or 4 anyway. Then when I spoke to him, he said, here's what it is, and here's the myth and the legend, which is that people for centuries have talked about this white city or whatever. I think the monkey god thing came in as almost a marketing device.
Right.
There's no evidence of any market. In fact, what we found was a totem of a jaguar and jaguar head.
I was going to ask you about the monkey god thing, but you read my mind and we're already there. So you've heard about this city in Honduras in this pretty rough jungle. This is 94. At this point, you're fired up. He's fired up. And about the same time, an article comes out in Archaeology magazine that talks about this cave of the glowing skulls, which I believe is also in Honduras.
Right.
And this kind of
knew about that directly. He had seen it.
Oh, he saw it.
Yeah, before the article came out. And that kind of convinced me more than any of it that this is real in a way that nobody had ever thought about it. Because there's in the Cave of the Glowing Skulls, these heads were lined up on the ledge of an old cave, but people had been going in, still going. It was kind of just a place to go, Mammoth Cave or something. And they could carbon date those heads. Well, hello. I mean,
right.
Let's start from the beginning then,
Right. Well, the reason I bring that up is just I'm trying to show people that these are the things that got the two of you very excited and led you to think, well, this isn't just a legend. Maybe there is actual truth to this matter. Now, in the early 90s, we still don't have the tech that you guys are going to eventually use. But in 96, Explain to me this. You guys reach out to a Japanese satellite company, I believe, and you get them to take some pictures of the area in Honduras that you think that this place may be at.
Exactly. We had a pretty wide area uh, that we were talking. I forget how many miles. It may have been 50 miles. And we took the results of that. Those satellite pictures went to the Jet Propulsion Lab in California, very close to Steve, where Steve lives in Pasadena. And he's got pals there, and he's just one of the scientists. He hangs out with the scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at it, and a particular guy, and said, the only thing that looks here in this whole thing that is possible and is this area that has it's square from the satellite picture. It's right angles, 4 right angles. And nature doesn't make right angles.
Right.
And so that is an indicator that, hey, something's going on here.
I believe that this was 1996, and the person at JPL was Dr. Ron Bloom, who looked at the images.
That's right.
Right. And so here again, we've got the article in archaeology about the caves, which Steve's seen. Now you got satellite images that you guys have commissioned. We're getting closer and closer to maybe figuring this thing out, but it takes a while. You're not going to get to Honduras until 2012. What happens in the meantime? You don't have to tell us all of it, but in a nutshell, what happens between 96 and 2012 to get you from looking at pictures on computers to going to Honduras?
Boy, it's a good question. It was not the main priority of our lives at that point, because we had lives and jobs and things to do, and this wasn't alive in the same way. But we never quit trying to find it out. Steve's wife Janet, from the beginning, called us the Lost Boys. But in that period, we got more and more involved with scientists and people who would give us leads. And in fact, at one point in that period, we had a conference at where the hell, I guess it was in Seattle, but we had like 9 or 10 PhDs in various areas who came for the day. That included anthropology, archaeology, the technology of the LIDAR, and it was a way to get the most people thinking about it in a way that they had, and get us thinking about it.
You mentioned LIDAR, because that's where I wanted to go with this. In that period, you're trying to raise money, you're doing business, you're in the television business. Steve, you mentioned, was also in the television business. And these things take time, especially when you're talking about going to a third world country with a essentially impenetrable rainforest, political instabilities, the issues of logistics that always go along with that. But around 2009, you guys hear about LIDAR, and I'm looking for my acronym for LIDAR, but essentially it allows you to create 3D maps or scans of images. And you guys are able to acquire that technology or borrow it. And in 2012, you make your first actual expedition down to Honduras, and you're going to have the LIDAR cameras or machines on board a Cessna. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it came from the University of Houston, actually, which was in the forefront of senses.
Sensing, remote sensing?
Yes, thank you. Remote sensing. And so they seemed to be the best people that we could find who would do it. And we struck a deal with them. It was a job for them. It wasn't like they were interested in archaeology or what was going on there so much. They weren't obsessed in any way at that point. But once we found things there, they understood what it was, that this was something nobody could explain. The technical guys, the PhD remote sensors, said, couldn't believe it. Anyway, that's the gist of the LIDAR. What it does is it can see through the trees, through the canopy of the jungle. I say see, because it's like a million streams of laser light going down and maybe some number gets through.
Right.
And the ones that get through beam right back up to the plane and make a dot pattern of where we are based on the location that the machine already knows. So it creates a picture that way. It's a dot pattern picture.
I would say that you guys were pioneers of that. It had already been used in Belize, I believe, for like a Mayan temple. But essentially, what you guys did with it in 2012, I would argue, was the textbook case for how this would go on to be used now. Tech moves very quickly. So now I think they can mount these things on a drone. But at that point, when you guys were using it, this was still considered, well, it had security classifications from the government.
Right. And took some weird politicking to even get that to happen, which just seems so ridiculous because it's a little Cessna with a big box in it. But it was used in Afghanistan or Iraq or something. And the guy who was the pilot had used LIDAR in the military. And then when he got out, this is what he wound up doing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and you guys had to hire military from the Honduran government to guard the plane because of the secure nature of the technology.
Yes, that's true. We had to have the Honduran government was very cooperative all the way through, and we couldn't have done it without them, obviously. And they had their own archaeologists there, and they made everything work as well as they could. And they had a couple people with us who were terrific, and we also had a whole jungle military group who had a camp just above us. So there were maybe 24 of them.
Well, the Honduran government, they looked at this, and for people who may not know, Honduras has had some tough times. And in the 90s and the 2000s, there has been a great deal of cartel activity there and political instability, like we have come to see in other countries in Central and South America. So this was a tough place to work in, but the Honduran government, to their credit, saw that the work that you guys wanted to do could put a positive spin on the face of Honduras.
Exactly. And that was their motivation. Was actually one of the first presidents that we had to deal with was from very close to the area. And he'd heard it all his life. He knew the myth and the story and the legend and all, and he was curious about it. Once you get a guy like that, then everybody down the line says, okay, we'll help you, which is kind of what happened.
So you guys jump through all the hoops that you have to, you dot all the I's and T's and make all these things happen that had to happen. And there were plenty of obstacles, but you do get to do, I think, 7 days of LIDAR scanning. And another person who's on the trip is New York Times bestselling author Douglas Preston. So he goes on to write a book about this, but tell us what you guys come up with in the 7 days of scanning while you're there.
What we found with LIDAR is that there's unidentified places that are pyramids, dirt pyramids, and that there were gathering places and that there were locations that needed to be checked out.
Yeah.
To see what was really there.
Well, basically, you guys came away with images that did depict something that looked like a very logical human settlement. So you were successful. The technology worked. You found what you thought you were looking for. Some articles were written about it. And one of the things that I found interesting, and this comes up again later in the story, is that so when some of the academics find out that you guys go down there and do that, they aren't thrilled about it.
Correct. They have archaeologists and a whole lot of academics are, what's the right word? Like, petty?
I think that's a really good word.
Competitive?
Yeah, proprietary.
Proprietary?
It's like, hey, it's like, yeah, it's like, and so the bottom line is there was a woman in Berkeley, Rosemary, I'm trying to find Rosemary's last name. Rosemary Joyce. She was a Mesoamerican specialist expert on Honduran archaeology from UC Berkeley. And she got really upset that you guys went down there. She thought you were like being cowboys. You're going to go down there and pillage the place or whatever. But I find that, just on a personal level, I find that a little disingenuous, man, because I've seen this time and time again. It's like where those who do get criticized by those who didn't. You guys incurred all of the risk.
I like that. Those who do get criticized by those who didn't. Exactly.
Yeah. And so you incurred all the risk. You did all the homework. You spent all the money to find this. And then you get attacked by the academic community. I didn't stop you, of course, but I mean, it kind of irked me that happened.
Yeah, I agree. It irked us, but it also kind of shows what we were just talking about of the competitiveness and the academic. But we knew academically, scientifically, we were on terrific. We had it right. And that was because we had terrific archaeologists with us who had the experience and knew what to do and knew how to find we never would have been able to find things the way we had without him. And there's a very interesting piece that I never saw before, which is this is Chris Fisher from Colorado State. He had a device that would integrated the LIDAR and the GPS.
Right.
So that he could tell where we are or where we've been, and it was all programmed into his GPS.
But he was on the second expedition. He was not on the 2012 expedition, right?
Correct.
Okay. So that's where I want to go now. So you guys...
I'm sorry.
No worries. No worries. You were there. It's your story. I'm just trying to... We're trying to tell
it. I don't remember it as well as you do from having read the book. I haven't... Anyway, go ahead.
So anyway, you guys come back. You got the goods. Douglas Preston writes an article for the New Yorker or something. The academics get bent out of shape. But the deal is, you came back with images of almost certain human settlements. There's right angles, there's platforms, there's rectangles that look like ball courts, the things that you might expect from a Mayan adjacent culture.
But at that point, we were discouraged because we didn't know how we're going to get it next. And then when Doug's piece came out in the New Yorker, it was Katie by the door. It was, he is a tremendous writer, respected, and it was in the New Yorker. And it's going to be right. And so all of a sudden, we had credibility that we never had before that. It's from a media standpoint, we couldn't have gotten very far without it's having been in the New Yorker by Doug Preston.
And by 2015, you clearly have got enough steam up that you're able to go back in February of 2015. Now you're actually going to go on the ground, including yourself. And we'll talk about the team, because you went there with probably 10 or 15 people, and there was a team that cleared some of the brush. I mean, this was a major undertaking because this is an incredibly inhospitable rainforest. There's danger, there's bugs, there's snakes, you can't see 10 feet ahead. Was the excitement, did that override any fear you had about it going down there?
Maybe stupidity. I'm naivete. And excitement. But the point was that it was, okay, well, we're doing this. I never gave it much of a thought. We got certain guidelines from the three jungle experts, really, who are like Navy SEALs. They were Brits. They were the British. So we got some advice what to be looking for and the snakes and so on and so forth. But me, personally, I didn't give it much thought. I'm not proud of that, but it's like, okay, well, we're going. We're just going to go see what we can see. And that's what we've been doing for all these years. Let's go.
No, that's exactly what I would expect. I mean, you'd already invested going on 10 plus years into this, all the research, all the money, all the time. So I just had to ask that. I thought that might be your answer, but so you're going to go into the jungle where you saw these images on LIDAR. You have a team that is a joint Honduran and American team. As you mentioned, there's kind of these security jungle specialists that you've hired to come along with you. One of the anecdotes that you tell about when you get there is that you do encounter one of these highly venomous snakes. And for people who don't know, there's a snake, at least in Honduras, I don't know what their entire domain is, called a fer de lance. And I believe that is the most venomous snake in North America.
Yeah, I think that's what they tell us. And when you're out, and it's a matter of how quickly that the venom can kill you. That's part of why it's the most dangerous, because if you're out in the middle of nowhere, which is of course where they are, it's a lot of people die of that because they can't get to a place where they can get the venom out, or to a hospital or sorts.
And the first night you're there, you guys encounter one, but your buddy from Britain does his job and takes care of the snake, but you do encounter more of those. So we've got that going on. We've got all these animals who've never seen humans before because no one's actually set foot in that area in centuries, right?
That's what we think. Yeah. I mean, the monkeys were the most fun. They just sit up there and talk, yap at us. I mean, they were trying to, who knows what they were trying, but it was not a regular situation.
Right.
Because they didn't know. They weren't afraid at all. And some animals came right through the camp. And people, no. I mean, they'd certainly never been hunted or shot or we weren't part of the problem with these particular animals, right, as we are most of the world.
And so you guys are down there on the floor in this impenetrable jungle in Honduras. You're there for several days. A couple days into it, you do make a discovery. And this, again, is one of those interesting points in the story, at least to me. Talk about that moment when you guys find the cache of artifacts and then the predicament that you're presented with as a result of finding it.
Well, what happened was that the camera operator, the cinematographer, was in our line of 5 or 6 people who were at the end of the day just, oh God. And then all of a sudden, goes, look! Look! I mean, he saw what was a shard of a statue that was clearly something nobody had ever seen before. I shouldn't say nobody had ever seen, but it was a legitimate thing that had been there for a long time. And so I don't remember, but we probably found 50 or so different pieces and shards and parts of sculptures and so on during that week. And the next question is, as you asked it, okay, so now what happens to this stuff? And it's based on where it is and the value of it in certain museums and stolen goods.
Black market.
Yeah, thank you. So what happens? And so we were in a place where we had to figure out what to do. And that's one of the best parts of the documentary, which is it was what we were really doing at that point, is trying to figure out if we leave it here, somebody will steal it.
Yep.
What else can we do? Well, we could take a couple of the pieces and show it to the museums and so on and so forth, so that it would make sure that we could come back and it would be protected. I mean, we weren't trying to take those. We were trying to take those around to the British Museum or wherever. But we didn't, because the archaeologists prevailed, who said, if you do that, if you take anything out, it's not what's the right word? Incito. So that's how we have to leave what we've got and leave it there.
Tom,
and yeah,
as you mentioned in the documentary, it is very well depicted, and the lead archaeologist, the American archaeologist, is Chris
Fisher.
Chris Fisher. So immediately when you guys find the cache, he tells everyone to stop, don't move. You might step on something or something. I get all of that. Well, now you find out that you've got all of these pieces, and Steve Elkins and the producer, Bill Benison, they now are in conflict with Chris and the other archaeologists because I think that they want to take a couple of pieces back to the States or wherever to show, look, we found it. Here's some things.
Yeah.
We want to do more of this. And Chris says, no, we've got this serious cultural, ethical issue, which I struggled with that just watching it. It is one of the best parts of the documentaries. One thing I thought about watching, I was like, well, wait a minute. Did they not say that to you guys prior that, hey, by the way, if we find something, we cannot remove it? Had that question not been broached until that moment of discovery?
Not as far as I know.
Wow.
I don't think anybody took it that far.
Hmm.
There was no question of whose cultural patrimony it was and
Right.
who would belong to. It certainly did not belong to us. And we knew that, and that was clear. And we were there with them and on their behalf in certain ways. So I don't think anybody ever said anything about whether we could or couldn't. And at that point in that discussion, there was nobody of any governmental or political. It was the people on the trip, the archaeologists and all of us and so on. So it wasn't a matter then of you can't do that, or you know, it was. We had to hash it out first because we were there with the stuff.
Well, and the archaeologists did prevail. You guys did leave the artifacts in the ground as they were, but you mentioned this piece of technology that Chris had, which allowed the LIDAR imaging that you had done before to be matched to current GPS, I suppose. So you guys were able to, again, scan that area where you found all of these artifacts. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was with portable LIDAR. It was not with, which is something that's been around for a long time. And it was even applied to catching speeders. And it has, but nobody had gone up into the air to try to find something that nobody knew was there, if you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yes.
So you guys, he does convince you guys to leave the stuff there. You take the images, you do all that. There is one particular image that you see, which is now on a stamp of Honduras, and it takes us back to the monkey thing because we were talking about the monkey god. But in fact, this particular artifact looked like a jaguar.
Yeah. Jaguar head. And, you know, when we first saw it that day, it was like, it's a monkey. It's a monkey. We wanted it to be the monkey god, but it's undeniably a jaguar head. So, and it's remarkable in stone, you know, sculpture, just amazing.
You're coming down to the end of the expedition. People are getting tired. You're very elated that you found artifacts. You're going to leave them there. You're going to have to go back and report all this to the government and to the press and all this. Did you have any idea? Did the team have any idea at that time who these people were? Because they didn't seem to be Mayans. We don't think they're Olmecs. Did they have any clue who these people might have been that we're looking at the artifacts of?
No, they knew because the sculptures and the work was not purely Mayan. Looked like Mayan in certain ways, represent similar, but it was not Mayan. And these guys know what the art does. And I don't know anything about that, but I trust them because they've been studying it for a long time. So no, it's not Mayan, but it's sort of it. And the explanation that came out of it is whoever these people were, we're not saying they were entirely different aliens or something,
right?
But they'd been there a while and they had a different culture and a different way of doing things than the Mayans that we know were in all the places, the Tikal and all. What they came up with and what seems logical to me is that this was its own little place. They think there's a few thousand people there at one time. And it was a trading point along the Atlantic and the rivers. So they wound up with stuff from over here, and they wound up with stuff from over here, so that the cultures got intertwined in certain ways, and the people did. So they're neighbors, but they weren't the same.
They were influenced by these other people, and they probably shared some of the same DNA with the local cultures, not Mayan, not Olmec, but not necessarily completely dissimilar. They were trading partners with these other people. So you guys have achieved your goal. You go down there, you've spent a couple of decades on this and a lot of money. You found what you were looking for. We don't know where the monkey aspect of the monkey god comes from, and we don't know exactly if this is the White City, but it is certainly a lost city.
Right. I think that's a good way to put it. In my book, there's a picture of the monkey god fantasy, because it was created by a guy who put it in a Hearst kind of newspaper in the 20s, I think.
Yeah.
It has no bearing in reality.
Right.
So, except that people had called it the monkey god.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of monkey god history, a lot more in India and the Hanuman and all that.
Yes.
But so that's possible. It wasn't unlikely. Maybe it slipped over there.
Well, there were a lot of monkeys in the area. So, I mean, yeah, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, you guys end up renaming it to City of the Jaguar. Is that correct?
Correct. The government has now officially called it.
And the Honduran government will eventually, well, I guess they keep soldiers on the scene to protect the grounds. They don't really let the word out where this thing is. And I guess a year later, another expedition goes there, and Chris, I think, is part of that again.
They went down there for another expedition, and they found more stuff. Took it from 50 to over 200 shards and pieces. They all went into a kind of a makeshift museum in the town of Catacamas by the airfield where we took off from.
Well, another thing that's very interesting to me about this story is because every lost city, right, has a curse, right? I mean, it can't be a lost city if there's not a curse. And weirdly enough, you guys go down there, you go into this impenetrable, inhospitable place, poisonous snakes, large cats, just all kinds of issues.
Well, it's the bugs.
And you come away weeks later realizing you have an illness. Can you talk about that?
I went to summer camp when I was a kid to the woods, the North Woods in Wisconsin, but it's the same wherever you go. In the woods, you get mosquito bites. And we had a lot of bites all over. You know, and a mosquito bite takes a week or so and you forgot it was there. We had several of us, I think 10 out of 20,
Yep.
had little things that wouldn't go away as a mosquito bite or as a bug bite or something. Well, it turns out what those are were caused by a parasite.
Yeah, I'm going to try to say the name and I'll probably mispronounce it, but it's leishmaniasis.
Yeah, leishmaniasis is what usually they call it. And we were also told that many of the Honduran military guys, almost all of them got it. They weren't jungle people, you know, they were soldiers from the city and so on. So they didn't know. And we wound up becoming a test case, a protocol with the National Institute of Health, because they were interested in having everybody who got it in the same place. And so they could perhaps do something with that, chemically with that, and try to come up with a vaccine, which is if they could create, anyway. Yeah. They're still working on it.
Yeah. Well, for the audience, this particular parasite, the wounds that it leaves are pretty bad. It necrotizes the skin. You eventually had to have, I think, a few weeks of infusions.
Yeah, I think the cure for it is sort of is anybody's guess. And one of the things is that you can get an infusion, which in fact is supposed to kill these parasites.
Mhm.
But it takes over a period of a month or so, and it's kind of unpleasant stuff, and you have to sit in the hospital for a couple hours and so on. It didn't really get rid of it because usually it goes away on its own. And I think mine, here we are 7 years later, and mine is almost unnoticeable, the one on my hand.
Mhm.
That was a festering sore for a while. And maybe the medicine took care of that, and maybe time took care of it. Who knows?
Did everyone recover that came down with this?
Yeah, I mean, we all had our own set of problems because it was like Fisher got it on the bottom of his foot from being in the creek. So it depends where the bug went.
Yes, yes.
Um,
That was a interesting and unfortunate twist on your story, but at the end of it, you guys were victorious. You put 20 some odd years into this. You and Steve Elkins had started out with this conversation about finding this thing, and Steve ended up leading these expeditions. You were on board for both expeditions. You are the official chronicler of it. And once again, people can find the book. It is Chasing the Lost City, Chronicles of Discovery in Honduras. And this isn't the only book. Douglas Preston, he had a book as well that became a bestseller. And there is the documentary that you can see on Discovery Plus. I watched it last night. If you're into nature and history and these types of things, I think you'll find it enjoyable. Tom, with a few years to look back on it,
yeah.
I know you don't regret it. I know you're glad you did it, and you should be extremely proud. But wax philosophical for me a little bit. I personally think that it is within humankind to be explorers. I think that we have to explore.
I agree.
Tell me how you feel about it in retrospect.
I've never had the ambition to be an explorer per se. Okay. I like to do new things all the time. I like to find, if I drive around Chicago here, I have to go a different way each time to see what I can see. But so I'm a see what I can see guy, but I'm hardly a deep-rooted explorer because I'm interested in what's going on and not necessarily what. Anyway, and I'm a journalist and a documentary maker, and so what the science or the profession or the career of being an explorer was never anything that was even in me. That still isn't.
But
I
just
don't
the
need to go
spirit.
back to Honduras. I don't need to go anywhere, except the beach. So,
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean to imply that you saw it as a professional obligation or endeavor, but I just think that you're a curious man and you wanted to learn, and
of
it was,
course.
and you found what you were looking for. And hats off to both you and Steve and your entire team for what you did. You hung in there, and you did it.
Yeah, I think it was a remarkable thing. And you asked me about what it really felt like. What it feels like is that this was something that was an accomplishment in certain ways of my life that I didn't know I was going to have. Okay. And it was something that taught me a lot about people and the way the world works and history. And it was a wonderful experience in every possible way, except maybe this.
Right. I'm glad that you guys did it, because when we look at the rest of Mesoamerica, we look at South America, and we look at these huge bodies of land that have these giant canopies of trees over them. I mean, we could only speculate, but we could guess there's probably still a lot to be discovered out there.
Oh boy. Really, even right where we were, as you mentioned, we had target 1 and target 3, which were our first choices in the LIDAR. But in fact, we really couldn't get to target 3 with any kind of depth. And several of the people who were both the remote sensors, the scientists, and some of the archaeologists said the target 3 is going to be better and with more stuff in it and more just because of the geography and so, and the way it looks on the LIDAR. But we never could get back to that one because it's a whole different set of helicopters and soldiers.
Well, it is quite the adventure. And sometimes I like to be able to tell these stories because I think you guys mentioned in the book and in the documentary, we typically think of the 21st century. We found it all. There's not that much left to be discovered. Actually, there might be a lot. And I think that's incredibly exciting. And you guys did it. I congratulate you. Ladies and gentlemen, the book is Chasing the Lost City, Chronicles of Discovery in Honduras. Tom Weinberg, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
It was great. Thank you. You really knew more about it right now, about the book and the order than I could remember because it was long ago. So I commend you for your being on top of it. Thank you.
Well, brother, I can't even remember what I had for lunch yesterday. So I have to, I really enjoyed this. My wife and I watched the documentary last night. I love this stuff. I found it really fun. So it was a joy. Ladies and gentlemen, if you find this show a joy and what we're doing here at the podcast and on the videos, please share it with your family and friends. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps me out a whole lot and it just keeps me going. So if you could do that, please do it. Share it to your friends, put it on social media. Help Tom tell his story. Go buy the book. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll be helping the good guys. I thank you for listening. Until next time, keep your heart and your mind open.